excited to have you. And today, our webinar is going to be on cutting cloud costs and simplifying management. So Jason is going to do a demo for us a little bit later in the presentation. My name's Adriana. I'm the account manager here at Graphical Networks. And we also have Jason here, of course. He is our director of customer support. And Tim is also joining us today. He is our sales executive, so you may be hearing from him after the presentation. And Fred Coate is our director of sales as well.
All right, I'll take it from here. Moving down, basically it's a 30-minute webinar here. See if it lasts 30 minutes or not, but we're going to cover a few things having to do with cloud. I'll talk about Azure and AWS. We do support GPC as well. And I'll kind of talk about what that sort of means. We had some poll questions. I'll start those in just a second. Please, if you do have questions as we go, just post them, and then we'll get to them at the end. Definitely try and take care of those for you. And get into some kind of use cases. Basically, the main thing we do is really cloud visualization, and then there's some monitoring side to this as well. And I'll talk about those two pieces and what we do and what data we collect. I kind of know this in two ways. One, it's relatively familiar with AWS and Azure from the standpoint of setting up EC2s or virtual machines and configuring firewall rules and that type of stuff. I don't get too heavy into. We do Kubernetes and some other stuff. I'm not as well versed in some of those things, but the related technologies to a certain extent. Obviously, AWS and Azure is more than just hosted servers in the cloud. I guess that's a big part of the business, but they have a lot of applications and services and various other things you can run. So we have some core focus here with respect to Azure and AWS is what we sort of look at. Doesn't mean we can't add more functionality and features. The API set, which is what we tie into with these tools, is massive. Their libraries are massive, so you can really almost pull anything out of these tools. But this is our core focus right now, and moving forward, we'll probably start to add more things into it, especially as we hear more feedback from prospects and customers and that sort of thing. So it's a big beast, the AWS and Azure environments. So there's a lot of things you can do. But the visualization side is a big kind of component of it. Again, some of the monitoring things. Troubleshooting to a certain extent, because when you do obviously have an understanding of your environment, it's a little easier to troubleshoot issues, find information. For me, oftentimes I'll use our tool, go in and do a search, find something. So if I want to understand what might be wrong or not working properly, hey, I don't have access to this environment, what's going on? The first thing I always try and do is find out, obviously, firewall rules and things like that, and try and understand, okay, well, that's usually why people don't have things like access, or if the system's down. I mean, some of those things you're going to get alerts from Azure and AWS directly, but if you do have to do some troubleshooting, it's nice to have some information and visualization available as well. When you're doing audits, things like SOC 2, you have to have diagrams and information. It just helps you give you the ability to draw those things out or have some pre-drawings, as the case may be, and be able to just configure those the way you need them in order to provide to, let's say, an audit person where you need to deliver, hey, this is what the environment looks like and is. So poll question 1, let me get up to my poll question here, and it's loading up, I think. All right. New poll. Actually, I don't see the poll questions. Maybe they didn't get loaded up. Adriana, I'll let you check that, the poll questions. And while you're looking into that,
Sure, no worries.
I will start up the netTerrain machine here. All right. So if you're not familiar with netTerrain, we are a visualization tool primarily for really network documentation. So you should see my screen. It's very red. This is just some example projects I have, and so on. So did you find out? I see a poll thing kind of popped up, but I don't see the poll in there. That's all right. We'll just get into the demo stuff. That's what most folks want to see anyway. So the visualization side is we're very much a hierarchical tool. So you can sort of drill down and get into like detail. Like as-built network environments, things like that, rack and stack. And obviously, when you're talking about cloud stuff, that doesn't really apply, right? You're not talking about rack elevations and where things are. But that's sort of traditional network stuff, right? You rack and stack. Where is it located in my environment? Wiring closets and so on, or data centers, or you're doing logical drawings, right? You kind of show logical environment, how things are pieced together. Where's the entry point? That type of stuff. But when you get into obviously virtual, whether it's a virtual machine or virtual environment, it's a little bit different story, right? So one is you may not know all the pieces. You may not have access to all the pieces, right? I mean, the thing about Azure and AWS is they're very obviously a lot of security around those environments. They're very granular in security and permissions. So you set up something like an IAM rule for a user, and you say, well, you can be read-only for an EC2 instance or for a virtual machine instance, and that's it. You log in, that's all you see. Right? You may not even be able to get access to other parts or components or other tools within the tool. Managing those things is pretty hard too, but if you want to see an environment or give people access to the environment from the standpoint of what is it that we have in these environments without having to necessarily give them permissions to AWS or Azure. One way to do that is you pull the data into a tool like ours and you visualize it. You have the information there, and you might bring some other information to this as well. So on and so forth. But how do you get the data, though, from a system like AWS and Azure into something where you're going to visualize it, right? Where you're going to pull it across. And, whatever the tool is, typically the most common way you do it, you don't want to draw it by hand, obviously. That manual effort, that would take forever when you're talking about a big AWS or Azure environment. So you want to try and automate that as best you can. And the way we do that or can do that is using, again, I mentioned the APIs, is using those to pull data from those systems into a tool like ours. So what kind of data might you bring across? Well, from AWS or Azure, the terminology might be different, but it's kind of similar from the standpoint of you have databases or you have instances, whether it's called EC2 or virtual machines or whatever. You have gateways and you have IP addresses and various other things, that data that you're going to collect. So how do we collect that data, though? Well, how do you bring the data across from AWS and Azure? Well, we have a tool within the tool. So if we go to our tools, utilities, there's something we call the collector, and I'm going to drag that collector over here. Oops, sorry. Let me drag the collector over. So we have the collector, and we have these things called connectors. And you'll see AWS and Azure. There's one for GCP, and there's others for different systems. These are non-cloud systems, not cloud systems necessarily. Some are, but something like, which most folks on the call might have heard of, something like SolarWinds or ServiceNow, right? They all have data in them that represents your environment. So you're like, how do you leverage this data to help you document your environment? And one, you want to automate it, obviously, as best you can. Make it so you have as minimal, hands-on need as possible. So in our case, what you do is you go to Azure, you go into the environment, you do a configuration, you set up your connection string using a user or token or whatever the access method is, and then you do a discovery. You scan the network, and then you get data. So like in my case, I've got a whole bunch of data from Azure. Creation data disks, and you can see stuff on the left-hand side. These can be fine-tuned. You have within connectors, you have the ability to configure things. You go into advanced, and you can choose sort of what data you're going to bring across. AWS, there's quite a bit. Azure, there's quite a bit too, but you can choose if there's some things you don't care about. You're like, oh, I don't do Kubernetes, I'll just leave that out. I mean, of course, it wouldn't bring anything in anyway. But the point is, you're trying to automate this from a standpoint of, hey, I want to collect data. What data do I want to collect? Put it into the connector. The connector has a connection to your netTerrain server, which is really the visualization engine in this case. And the data gets pushed into your netTerrain server. So, and that's what I have here. I've got just some representative diagrams just to kind of give you a feel for the information that can come across, what it might look like when it does get pushed across. All these things can be changed and configured and sort of moved around sort of as needed. And they also give the ability to do some other things within the tool, and I'm going to talk about that now. So the most common thing in AWS, from my perspective, is always instances, EC2s, servers in the cloud, whatever the case may be. And your environment might be different. You guys might be focused on some other technology or some other core that, AWS, that you use at AWS or Azure. And it might be data that we don't actually currently capture today. Again, it doesn't mean we can't get it. Just may be that, it's not something that we're that familiar with. There's a lot of obviously tools within these tools. So anyway, if I go to my instances here, you'll notice one of the things you'll start to notice is the makeup of what you're seeing in our hierarchy in this case. So I have an object, US East, it's a container. And these are directly created from, in this case, AWS data. So in AWS, you have, VPCs and regions and containers and the EC2s and the firewall rules and or security groups and so on. So we're just leveraging all that, bringing it across and trying to make obviously a certain look and feel for that information. So if I go into my US East, I've got a bunch of EC2 instances here. These EC2 instances, most of them are turned off. That's why they're gray. There is one here that's orange. That one's currently active. So when you're talking about things like status or monitoring, one of the things you care about, of course, is this thing running and how many of these things do I have that are running. I can go to AWS and see that too, but it might be a little harder to see that across multiple regions in one view, or you're going to have to go into AWS and go through each region, then do a sort of a search and say, all right, just show me running instances. You may not know what the instance is either. At least in here, you can click and get all the data points about the instance. If you are using things like an instance name or the tags and so on, you can display all that information in our tool as well. So it can help you not only visualize, but also get to the information quickly and see things pretty fast too. You're like, how many things are running in US East? Well, everything but one right now. What is it costing me? I mean, you may have costs associated with things that aren't running, of course. So that's one of the other things you can get besides the status of, hey, is this thing on or off, is cost. And, a big direction for us is trying to visualize and get more cost information about all these different pieces. So when you do look at something like an EC2 instance, you can tell right away what volume is hanging off of it, or volumes, or snapshots of the volumes, and so on and so forth. So this is where you start to get into more of a picture, in this case, EC2 specific and related, where I can go in and go, oh, here's my machine, my server that's running the cost lab. I know what it's costing me up to this point for the month or for the last 3 months. I know what my volume's costed me. I know I've got a bunch of snapshots hanging off of it. I can see when those snapshots were created, and so on. So again, giving me information about the object, about what's connected to it. The connections, the relationships, that all comes out of AWS. There's a relationship between a volume and an EC2. So if there is a volume, it's going to be connected to an EC2. If you have a volume that's not connected, well, that might be an issue in and of itself. You might have volumes that you want to get rid of, right? They're not being used, kind of thing. So, those are things you have to consider and certainly think about. So all these things lead back to information about that environment and how you see this information. We sort of out of the box this is sort of a traditional view for us, where you go down into an EC2 through a region and so on. But you can take that data, you can take that information and move things around if you need to. So it's up to you. But these are just some of the points. I mean, you can go into something like a VPC and see all your VPCs and how they're tied back to a whole lot of security groups or gateways and other things. And this is just a layout that I created just to kind of show visually where you do have those relationships. And this can lead to cleanup too, right? You go in and go, why do I have so many security groups hanging off this VPC? I mean, some of them are required. And of course, a lot of them are there because of EC2 instances and things like that, but it allows you to go in and start to do some cleanup as well. So Azure is kind of similar too. If you go into Azure, You're going to see your subscription information, or if you have multiple subscriptions, you're going to be able to go into your different resource groups, navigate down. Again, you got virtual machines and configurations and IP addresses and subnets and so on. Again, it gets you down into this view of being able to see a running instance, attached storage, cost information, status. Is the thing running? Is it up or down? Is it have a relationship? Disks and other things, are they actually tied into something? Are they actually in use? And those types of things. So again, it gives you an idea of kind of where you are. You can certainly get into different reporting and other things too, where you can report back on things like cost and so on. I think this is the demo cloud. Let me see. I think I have a cost report that you can run as well. Let me see if that's on. Yeah, here we go. So I just have AWS cost reports, but you can break out your costs. You can look at your costs across the board. Now, again, if you have access to the cost information inside AWS Azure, you might go into those dashboards and tools that they offer to give you that information, which I fully understand and get. But a lot of people, some people may not have direct access to that environment or those pieces. So again, you can go in and see things like, oh, here's my volume costs, and investigate things. I mean, some people have access to AWS or Azure, and it's the cost side isn't necessarily that critical to what they're doing day to day. But a lot of folks do want to know. I want to know if a volume is costing me $50 a month or $500 a month or $1,000 a month. I can personally attest to the fact where I've gone in and seen storage that I'm paying for that's very expensive and not even in use anymore. And so I'll go in and kill that stuff off, or at least snapshot it and then kill that off. So it's a lot of things you can do. But the point of all this, you can get information out of these systems. You can automate bringing that data across to a tool like ours and help you visualize that information and data, and then do obviously different things with it. So I'll leave it at that for now. We'll see if there's any questions, and anything else I can